Welcome to Arsenal, where the weapons and war machines of military history come to life. Today we explore the M10 Wolverine Tank Destroyer in North Africa and Europe during the Second World War, and the crews and opponents who gave it its reputation. A longer print edition of this story, with fact sheets and photos, is available on LinkedIn or by email. Arsenal is the Friday feature of Dispatch U.S. Military History magazine, developed by trackpads.com.
Dawn comes up dirty over the Tunisian hills, more dust than light. On a low ridge line outside El Guettar in early 1943, American tank destroyers sit nose down in shallow scraped-out pits. They look tall and awkward at rest, with open turrets pointed toward a valley the crews have watched all night. Somewhere out there, German armor is forming up.
Inside one M10, 5 men wait in a steel box that is both cramped and exposed. The driver and assistant driver hunch low behind narrow vision slots. Above them, the gunner keeps one eye pressed to his sight. The loader waits beside stacked 3-inch shells, and the commander rises just high enough to see over the turret rim. The open top lets in cold air, dust, fuel fumes, and the uneasy reminder that anything bursting above them can reach the crew.
Then someone spots movement. German tanks and half-tracks appear through the haze, pushing forward in a broad line. Orders snap over the intercom. The driver nudges the vehicle into a hull-down angle, showing as little armor as possible, while enemy artillery begins to feel for the ridge. The commander calls the target. The gunner swings the heavy 3-inch gun by hand, fighting the slow traverse as shells land closer. The loader slams an armor-piercing round into the breech. The gun fires, the turret shudders, and a tracer streaks into the valley. Other M10s join in until the ridge flashes with gunfire. Some German vehicles keep coming, others burn and stop. In that moment, the whole tank destroyer idea is being tested under fire.
The M10 did not begin as a perfect design. It began as a problem. Early in the Second World War, American planners watched German armored forces break through Europe with concentrated, fast-moving tank attacks. U.S. doctrine treated tanks mainly as breakthrough and exploitation weapons, not as dedicated tank hunters. That left a dangerous question. What would stop a massed panzer thrust before it tore open an infantry front? The first answers were improvised. Guns were mounted on half-tracks, field pieces were dragged into exposed positions, and existing tanks were asked to do jobs they had not been designed to do. These stopgaps could be deadly in the right place, but they were vulnerable, slow to move once the battle shifted, and badly exposed under artillery fire or during a retreat.
The Army responded with dedicated tank destroyer battalions. They would be held back, then rushed toward a major enemy armored attack. To make that doctrine work, they needed a vehicle with enough gunpowder to defeat contemporary tanks, enough mobility to keep up with fast operations, and enough armor to survive if it used cover wisely. Maximum protection was not the priority. Speed, firepower, and rapid production mattered more. Designers joined a high-velocity 3-inch gun to a modified medium tank chassis that American industry already knew how to build. The result was the M10, with sloped but relatively thin armor and a tall, open-topped turret. Later generations would call it the Wolverine, though many wartime crews simply called it a TD, short for tank destroyer. It was meant to be a mobile answer to the panzer problem, and the campaigns in North Africa, Italy, and Northwest Europe gave commanders many chances to find out whether the answer was good enough. The M10's development reflected the pressure of early war lessons. Fully tracked mobility promised more than half-track gun mounts or towed anti-tank pieces, especially when roads clogged, maps failed, or the enemy broke through. By sharing engines, suspension components, and maintenance practices with the Sherman family, the Wolverine could be produced and supported in large numbers without starting from zero.
The design team accepted from the start that the vehicle would not fight like a true tank. It was supposed to move quickly, fire from ambush or prepared positions, and relocate before the enemy could answer. The open turret saved weight, improved visibility, simplified production, and gave the big gun room to work. It also exposed crews to rain, snow, shell fragments, small arms fire, and mortar bursts. Survivability depended as much on tactics and terrain as on armor plate. That industrial choice mattered as much as the gun itself. A weapon that could not be built, shipped, repaired, and supplied in quantity would not solve the Army's problem. By using a familiar mechanical base, the M10 could enter service quickly and travel with armored formations already learning to maintain Shermans in the field. Spare parts, recovery procedures, and depot knowledge all mattered when battalions were moving through deserts, mountains, and muddy European roads.
At a glance, the M10 was a tracked, turreted tank destroyer of U.S. origin, serving mainly with the U.S. Army in the European and Mediterranean theaters. It carried a 5-man crew, centered on a 3-inch main gun and supported by a heavy machine gun for local defense. It could move at road speeds broadly comparable to the Sherman tanks it often accompanied, and thousands were produced for U.S. tank destroyer battalions and Allied forces.
The turret also shaped the way crews thought and fought. A closed tank could sometimes hide its men behind armor and periscopes, but the Wolverine demanded constant awareness. Commanders could stand high and see the battlefield, yet they also had to decide when visibility became exposure. The good crew learned to fire, shift, and disappear before enemy guns or artillery registered the position. The vehicle rewarded confidence, but punished anyone who treated it like a heavy tank.
Inside the vehicle, the driver and assistant driver sat low in the hull, surrounded by heat, noise, levers, pedals, and the constant rattle of tracks. Their job was not glamorous, but it was vital. A small change in hull angle could mean the difference between a clear shot and a target hidden by terrain, or between a deflected hit and a shell punching through.
Above them, the open turret was the center of the fight. The gunner sat to the left of the long 3-inch gun and turned it by hand. The loader worked beside stacked ammunition that made the turret feel even tighter. The commander stood at the rear, scanning for targets, reading the ground, and deciding when to fire or move. Radios in the turret rear linked the M10 to its platoon and to supported units, while the intercom kept the crew together over engine noise and gun blasts.
The machine's purpose was clear. Everything inside existed to keep the gun firing, the crew communicating, and the vehicle moving. The armor was sloped to improve its chance of deflecting rounds, but it remained thin compared to heavier tanks. In training, the balance of firepower, mobility, and visibility looked clever. In combat, crews learned that the same tall silhouette and open turret that helped them see the enemy also made them vulnerable if they stayed too long in the wrong place.
Tactically, the best M10 crews tried to make the enemy react to them rather than the other way around. They looked for reverse slopes, road bends, tree lines, village edges, and covered routes that allowed them to appear suddenly, fire, and move. Coordination with infantry and artillery mattered because a tank destroyer alone could be isolated quickly. Used as part of a team, the Wolverine could make a dangerous approach even more costly for enemy armor. North Africa gave the M10 its first harsh lessons. At El Guettar and in similar fights, tank destroyer battalions tried to put doctrine into practice against experienced German forces. The plan was simple to describe and difficult to execute. Hold the TDs in reserve, let enemy armor reveal itself, then rush the Wolverines into flanking or hull-down positions where their guns could do the most damage. Dust, bad reports, clogged roads, and enemy skill made that much harder than it sounded.
In Tunisia, some battalions used ambush positions well and knocked out attacking tanks at respectable ranges.
Others were caught on skylines or funneled into poor ground where thin armor and open turrets became deadly liabilities. Artillery and air bursts were especially dangerous because fragments could pour into the fighting compartment. When crews had time to dig in, camouflage, and coordinate fields of fire, they could stop a panzer attack cold. When they did not, they paid heavily. As the war moved into Italy, the M10's role stretched beyond tank hunting. At Salerno, Anzio, and in the mountain fighting that followed, Wolverines fired high-explosive rounds at strongpoints, stone buildings, and dug-in positions. They became mobile fire support weapons when enemy armor was scarce, but infantry still needed direct fire. The tank destroyer label remained, but daily combat turned the M10 into a flexible tool.
Italy also showed that doctrine could not survive unchanged once infantry commanders discovered what a tracked 3-inch gun could do. An M10 might spend one day waiting for enemy armor, and the next day breaking open a roadblock, covering a river crossing, or knocking holes through a stone building. Crews did not always love being used as assault guns, because the work brought them close to mines, snipers, and artillery. Still, commanders used what they had, and the Wolverine's gun often made it too useful to leave in the rear.
Normandy made those strengths even clearer. In the bocage, M10s worked from orchard edges, sunken lanes, and village approaches, hunting side shots against panthers that were difficult to defeat from the front. During the Ardennes offensive, crews pushed through snow and confusion to defend road junctions and village entrances. These battles showed the value of a mobile, hard-hitting gun platform and the danger of forcing it into close-range brawls it was not built to win.
Veterans often began with the gun when they described what the M10 did well. The 3-inch main gun gave U.S. units a weapon that could handle common enemy tanks at medium range, especially with good ammunition and a trained crew. Mechanical reliability, inherited from the broader Sherman family, helped keep vehicles running through long campaigns. In a war where breakdowns could be as dangerous as enemy fire, reliability mattered.
The open turret was both advantage and curse. Commanders valued the visibility, the ventilation, and the ability to coordinate with nearby infantry. Soldiers on the ground appreciated that M10 crews were easier to signal and talk to than crews buttoned inside closed tanks. But the same opening left men exposed to mortars, artillery fragments, snipers, and fire from buildings or high ground. German forces learned to call artillery onto suspected TD positions and to target the Wolverine's tall outline.
The design evolved as battlefield experience accumulated. The M10A1 used a different power plant while keeping the basic hull and turret arrangement. Units added field modifications, including extra armor plates, sandbags, and makeshift overhead covers, even when those fixes added weight or made the vehicle clumsier. Later tank destroyers, including the faster M18 and the more heavily armed M36, tried to improve on the concept as enemy armor grew tougher.
The arrival of newer tank destroyers did not immediately make the M10 disappear. Production numbers, unit habits, and maintenance familiarity kept it in the field even as Panthers and Tigers made the 3-inch gun feel less dominant than it had earlier in the war. Many crews learned to compensate by seeking flank shots, firing from concealment, coordinating with artillery and infantry, and avoiding proud duels in open ground. The lesson was not that the Wolverine was useless, but that it had to be used honestly according to its limits. Allied forces also adapted the design. British units fitted the basic chassis with a different gun suited to their anti-tank doctrine, showing how the same platform could be reshaped by another army's needs. The Wolverine was not a dead end. It was a stepping stone whose combat reports influenced later vehicles, ammunition, and tactics.
The M10's legacy rests in what it did and what it taught. It gave American forces and their allies a mobile anti-tank platform when such weapons were urgently needed. It helped blunt armored thrusts in North Africa, supported hard fighting in Italy, and added much-needed firepower in Normandy and the Ardennes. At the same time, its weaknesses pushed armies toward better guns, stronger protection, and more flexible armored doctrine.
The vehicle also left a doctrinal warning. Specialized weapons can solve urgent problems, but real battlefields rarely respect tidy categories. The M10 was built to hunt tanks, yet it often supported infantry, smashed buildings, guarded crossroads, and filled gaps wherever firepower was needed. That flexibility made it useful, but it also exposed crews to missions beyond the design's safest envelope.
After the war, some M10s served with allied nations, in reserve stocks, or in secondary roles. Others became engineering vehicles, static defenses, or scrap. The survivors in museums and memorial parks are quiet teachers. Visitors can look into the open turret, see the height of the hull, and understand why the Wolverine demanded skill, nerve, and discipline from its crew. Behind every gun motor carriage designation were men who gambled their lives on speed, fire discipline, and a machine that was just good enough when used well.